In this video, I'm going to be talking about Ireland. But Ireland is only one small island nation. But so is your grandmother, old and small. Ireland has helped to populate much of America and other places like Australia. So there are channels, stems, branches from Ireland all over the world. And where they're not in great number, still their influences are there. Irish people are very influential, mainly because the spoken word, the wordsmith, the poet, the artist, the engineer has had impact worldwide throughout the centuries. I think there was some kind of mechanism invented here in Wexford. So it'd be things that would be in maybe machines that, who knows who to credit those things to, unless you know. So the point I'm making is that Ireland has certain rights afforded it that mean it has the access to be influential. Now, Ireland itself is a country that, though it has retained the sphere of influence, or access to it, it has often been raped. It has often been controlled by outside usurping or occupying forces, even the Catholic Church, and certainly the state, and certainly the British Empire. But it still remains influential. And some of the reason it's influential is because of the catastrophic events it went through and how it responded to them. Now, it was in about 1939 when, and I'm not a great historian, I wouldn't pretend to be, but I gather a summary of the spirit of things. That's kind of my nature. And so the 1939 constitutional enactment was a progression. But remember that there are wicked and evil entities in this world. And every step they take is designed to both appear like a good progression, but also facilitate future deviation and transgression from the spirit, the good spirit of that initial progression. So it augments, adds, amends in ways that appear outwardly to be a good progression for the people. This seems like a good idea. Let's do that. So that means that there's some kind of communication through mainstream media. And of course, a country that has freedom of expression has access to that. So it's a double-edged blade. But it gives them the opportunity, them, they, the pronouns of the wicked. They are a conglomerate. They are a culmination of entities that have a hive mind, complex throughout the entire world, the entire earth. They have lodges, associations, institutions, charitable organizations. They tend to be charitable towards their own. And situations whereby they get to have influence and access to the mainstream media and the organs of state, both of which have the capacity to broadcast, so to communicate messages broadly to every household. And once you maintain access to that structure, that complex, that infrastructure of democratic society, because it's fundamental to democratic society that the government can communicate with the people. But it's also fundamental to democratic society that the people can communicate with the government and actually tell the government what to do as a collective, as a massive, as a voting populace. So communications are not all one way, and in order that the common good and uprightness and righteousness and truth are at the fore of society and its progression, so that we don't make bad decisions, illogical progressions, and evil enter in, we must maintain and control what is allowed to be spoken in the mainstream media, which defies science. Now, Satan has tried to put his foot on that first. He has tried to do so with community standards and fact-checking that comes from Wikipedia. He has tried to be the one defining and redefining what we already know generationally for thousands of years. It's only a recent progression in the last 500 years that people have been calling the Earth a sphere, a globe. Prior to that, ancient civilizations knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that the Earth was not a sphere, was not a globe, but rather a flat plane, which of course implies a God. It's much more likely that a sphere would come about by way of random forces acting upon it than a flat plane perfectly situated with pillars and a sort of a roof called a firmament over it, purposefully preserving it and creating an inhabitable space for humans. The latter model of Earth, the true model, of course implies a creator. The former says that this ball was shaped by forces whittling it down over huge spans of time. Preposterous, absolutely preposterous. I have spent 3 years painting God's work, interpreting it, looking at the complexity of it. And there is no way that these things have randomly come about. Evolution hasn't been proven. There's no changing of kinds in the fossil record. Speciation, adaptation, and natural selection do not require the changing of kinds or evolution in any way, shape, or form. It's just the loss of genetic diversity through selective breeding or environmental hazards. And so it is not proven, remains a theory, and cannot be factored into our worldview or perception. Just like space travel cannot either, because you cannot fly through a solid metal looking glass called a firmament in a rocket. So all of this grand larceny, siphoning money out from the taxpayer, supported by the American president and the World Health Organization and the United Nations, who both have, by the way, a logo which is the flat earth model from a bird's eye perspective. So they're holding it out in front of you, kind of mocking you, as they lie to you. Why? Because they operate on the basis of karma, where they have to tell you the truth while they're lying to you. It's an I told you so mechanism. Because they're trying to cleanse their karma. Say, well, I did tell you. Look, I mean, come on. Our logo is the flat earth. So, Ireland, returning to that, I just want you to understand how mainstream media can be misused to totally deceive an entire generation on the earth. And generations. How it can be used to destroy our institutions of education by conditioning youths to accept an institution which doesn't tell the truth, which departs from science, transgresses what we know as a race. So Ireland, having the freedom of expression and those platforms of mainstream broadcast has to be very carefully held up as disseminating only scientific information that's been proven. Now, as I said, Satan has tried to get there first. He's been lying for the last 500 years. So it's hard to get people to realize that what they've been told from a baby, what their grandparents were told from a baby, is a lie. But not impossible. And so research it yourself, the flat earth model, and you will be convinced, if you're open, that the earth is flat and the physics are sound. You'll see that. So, which points to a God, which is what the devil doesn't want society to do, obviously, because he fights God and humanity. So, Ireland has the potential to be not only one of the best functioning countries in the earth, but also an example to many nations, like a grandmother can advise the youth. But when Granny's drunk, very little good advice is going to come from her. And people tend not to listen to the person who's not self-controlled. And blatantly so. And it is populating the media that Ireland is, terribly underhoused, and industry is waning and depleting, and jobs and the minimum wage, and they want to show that the current structures, the current sound, upright and morally true supporting structures, the Constitution of Ireland, which our ancestors gave us, is one of the best in the world, if it's properly implemented, of course. They want us to believe that our systems are failing and not our officials, who are, of course, Satan's puppets and lapdogs. One of which is Michael D. Higgins, the current president, who is a Freemason. That's a secret society. Our president's in a secret society with loyalties to a group of men that have a constitution that is not our own. He shouldn't be in the job. That disqualifies him, naturally. It goes against our constitution to have even a Freemason in An Garda Síochána as a policeman, let alone as a president and custodian of the Constitution, who signs bills into the legislation and in as law to be obeyed by the people. But he's saying, oh, there's legislation in existence that says I don't have to check constitutionality of bills, I can just sign them in. There's no prerequisite, to testing the constitutionality of bills. I'll just sign them in as law. Not employing the Supreme Court and the faculty thereof, barristers at law and the greatest minds on constitutional interpretation, but he'll just sign it in himself. No prerequisite to testing the constitutionality of bills, which is of course a lie, because it opposes his very office. You cannot ensure you're upholding the Constitution if you're signing things into the legislature which you haven't checked are constitutional or not. You can't say hand on heart, I know that's constitutional, therefore I'm custodian of the Constitution. Then you are a criminal and have become a tyrannical occupying force, dictating to the Irish people that they should presume legislation to be constitutional and just obey it as if it were tested and found to be constitutional. This is a great chasm in the operation of our government. A great shortcoming, and not one that could be excused for as ineptness, because the men who wouldn't know the basics shouldn't be in the job, right? And these men are far too intelligent not to know the basics. So this is orchestrated felony, which they try to mask with legislation brought about feloniously. So they tried to hide their crimes with more crimes. Like a liar, his lies with more lies. So this nation, Ireland, a grandmother nation of sorts, in that many Irish people have travelled abroad and populated other continents and nations, has an opportunity to not only clean house and remove the criminals from government and properly implement the Constitution of Ireland and remove businesses that don't conform to our statutory rights like Tesco. We have an opportunity to put clothes on our children's backs once more as a nation. I can't buy clothes from Ireland, made in Ireland. Where are the clothes factories in Ireland? You mean to say if the ships stop coming into Ireland, we'll have no clothes on our backs? Or we'll be cutting our trousers short to fit our children? That should outrage a nation, that their government have utterly failed to build basic infrastructure while they tell us we're one of the wealthiest nations in the world. Where is this wealth, if not in infrastructure? Is it in a few men's pockets? Because that can't be counted as the country's wealth unless it's being reinvested. And why would you invest it anywhere but the infrastructure first? So not only are our children being lied to by the institutions, but our governments are writing up legislations which aren't brought about constitutionally, which appear to give impunity and the avoidance of reprimand to those who are most responsible for the upkeep of our Constitution, i.e., and primarily the President of Ireland, who I believe to be a criminal at large. That is my solemn belief, and I have proof. And not only him, but Miss Justice Siobhan Phelan of the High Court, and the 3 Court of Appeal judges that said a legislation in Ireland can be considered presumptively constitutional. I mean, talk about departing from reason and logic and true definition and not caring about it. Presumption means literally in the lack of the evidence. A lack of evidence is a lack of knowledge, and a lack of knowledge is ignorance. We are not ignorant of our Constitution. And for a Court of Appeal in Ireland to say that we are and should behave as though we are ignorant of our Constitution, such that anything can be added as constitutional by way of the term presumptively, is absolute departure from logic and reason and good order. You cannot presume I'm wearing a beanie right now because you can see that I am wearing a beanie. You can't presume something is constitutional because you can see the Constitution. Another reason you can't presume on constitutionality as a court judge is because the Constitution has to be present in the court, in the knowledge of the faculty, in order for the warrant of the court to be ratified, validated, and in operation, to establish jurisdiction of the judge. His ability, in other words, to preside over the court that day and on that matter. So when they utter the term presumptively constitutional, they render their court rogue and criminal, not satisfying the warrant. Presumptively constitutional in and of itself is maniacal. It is like swinging a bat in a room full of babies. Because we have to hand this country down to our children, and we have to teach them proper definitions, wisdom and morality, and the uprightness of interpretation. And you're going to tell us as adults that we can presume on the present evidence? I can't presume I'm wearing a beanie, because I can see that I am. These men should be cuffed and taken away with immediate effect, because their level of transgression cannot be put down to ignorance or ineptness, only willful departure from what is true and constitutional, which is crime, and the instigation of it in others through the threat of incarceration for failure to comply with that which hasn't been proven to be in line with our laws. That's not allowed. I don't care if it's somebody said they legislated for it. It wasn't the Irish people. Just like the Irish people didn't legislate that if Michael D. Higgins is found in misconduct, that he can't be held accountable to the courts of Ireland. Of course he can. Or is he not a man of Ireland? Therefore he is a rogue. Everybody set foot on this land is answerable to the courts of Ireland. Especially a president in misconduct. Or did Donald Trump escape the court? Who does Michael D. Higgins think he is? Because he's behaving like a tyrannical dictator, a warlord of sorts. Supreme head of the Defence Forces, that's a military power. Denying that he has to submit to the courts of Ireland. That's an opposition. That's a refusal to comply with the system that gives him his position. An outright refusal, whilst he claims to wield military authority. That's pretty much the definition of a warlord. So Ireland is occupied by Freemasons. They have taken the helm of the ship, and that's why it's in a mess. That's why the basics aren't being done. Why? Freemasons fill their own pockets. Government relationships with big businesses line the pockets of the Freemasons and bring about decentralization of power and provision for the takeover of nations. Ireland cannot produce enough clothes to clothe Irish people in 2024. I spent most of yesterday asking Irish people, just as a sort of not like a petition, but like a questionnaire to find information that you would, want to accumulate or record. I asked the people, how many people here, guys, just for your thought and your own perusal, are wearing an item of clothing or even own one that was made in Ireland? And only people who made the clothes themselves said, I do. There was only one person. One lady. She said, I do. I said, did you make it yourself? Yeah. I said, well done for your skills, but I don't think you're able to be able to meet the demand for Irish clothes. Ireland in 2024 is so inept, so technologically disadvantaged, that we can't make our own clothes. Are we expected to believe that? Cheaper to do it in China? No, it isn't. Because when you pay money to the Chinese, you don't get any of it back. When you pay it to the Irish, it comes back into the economy. It's not cheaper to do something in China. It is to the individual, but not to the country. So we have to stop prioritising the individual business person, like Dragon's Den and Shark Tank have taught you to do, but prioritise the economy of Ireland, not the individual business expenditure, but the entire national expenditure. And, of course, Donald Trump, being a businessman, understands this. And he has communicated it to the people. If you want to make America great, you have to start making stuff in America. And it's not to destroy rapport with other nations, but you exploiting the poverty of the Chinese to pay them less than you would the Irish not only exploits the Chinese, but also the Irish. It disadvantages both to exalt the individual. And the devil wants to make individuals who have absolute power because then he's in control. So this is so complex, though it seems so simple. So illogical, though it seems rational. If you have partial knowledge, you'll fail to see how it's harming us as a nation. And that is harming the individual. So whilst you have a Cruella de Vil figure making some money, the entire nation suffers as a result of her evil schemes. Do you understand now? So Ireland, when are you going to be able to put a Gyanzi on the man? When are you going to be able to put a jumper on the paddy? When is the Paddy Whack clothing brand going to start up? Paddy Whack, give a man a home. Housing scheme. They make you feel like you're asking for too much, asking for a house to be built. How dare they? Build the houses or you're sacked. .com/not qualified for the job. About time they poured out the drink. So, the point is this, that if you don't get the basics of industry right, you can't get the basics of infrastructure right. And if you don't get the basics of infrastructure right, you can't get the basics of industry right. So what does Ireland need to do? Ireland needs to not take no for an answer when it comes to clothing ourselves, farming for ourselves, and building houses for ourselves. That requires education to do those three aforementioned tasks. So the first port of call is educate and skill the people to build the infrastructure, then build the infrastructure. Then you increase the minimum wage so that people can afford what that infrastructure is producing, in order that the end price of the product produced continues perpetually to enable and facilitate the continuance of adequate infrastructure. That's not difficult. You need builders to build, farmers to farm, and clothes makers to tailor. To dress you. What's difficult about that? I wonder if the only reason there aren't enough houses in Ireland is because you couldn't get a Chinese man to build them for cheap in China. And that should anger you, because that's stupid. Because you have to pay a local builder to build the houses, and that's money into your economy. And when somebody's trying to destroy your country, they don't want you to have any money into your pocket. They want you coming to them for handouts, so they can pour water down your neck and tell you it's raining. But there's a little bit of a contaminant in the water. And that's the deception. So, think about it, guys. Irish people can't clothe themselves. Do you think that China needs our business? We only have 4 million people. 4.5, 5, is it? Somebody might argue. We only have less than 10 million people. Some cities in China, I'd imagine, have that many people. China don't need our business. It's not like you're paying them very well anyway. But they get to rape our grandmother. And the world's grandmother. By undercutting those who would protect her. Because they're all up in your bloomers. Dress yourself, Ireland, because you're putting on somebody else's trousers. Dress yourself and get rid of the criminals out of the president's seat and farther afield, is my belief. Because a custodian of the Constitution has to prioritise constitutionality of bills prior to enacting them into the law, or he's not doing his job. And a refusal to do your job, but rather corrupt the system, is criminality. It's crime. Dress yourself, Ireland. Set up a factory for clothing in Ireland, and if that means you get a Chinese man to come over here and actually pay him well for it, then do it. And he'll show you how to set up a company that makes clothes in Ireland. How hard is that? I wonder if you could find a Chinaman who'd be willing to come over to Ireland to set up a clothing factory. You'd have next day delivery then. Surely even the savings on logistics is appealing to a businessman. Unless they have another motive. So, why isn't there a Chinaman in Ireland showing us how to build factories to make clothes in? Bring the factories home. Listen to Trump, he's a businessman. He's saying some stuff that makes sense. He's plenty of experience in business. You can't take that from him. He understands that if all your money is going out of country, none of it's coming back. That is a siphon. That is a devaluing. That is a reduction of the available currency. That is loss of money that you'll never see again. bring the factories home. Let China make Chinese clothes. Let Irish people make Irish clothes. What's hard about that? Give some Irish lads a job. Even some Chinese lads a job over here in a factory. But over here. So that they're spending money over here. Even if they were to send a bit of it home, they'd probably be earning more if they were over here working in a factory than they're over there, if you really want to help them. They don't need your help or your business. If you really want to help Chinese people with employment, bring them to Ireland and let them work in the clothes factories here. But I'm sure there'll be plenty of Irish lads willing to do the work. I'm sure Ireland has plenty of aspiring clothes designers who'd like to set up a clothes factory. Why aren't there government initiatives? Build your infrastructure. Get the Irish Gyanzi out there again. Put the Gyanzi on the paddy's back. The Paddywhack Clothing Company. What's stopping it? What's stopping you? It's ridiculous. You can't IT a jumper on your back. You might think this is rather insignificant, but it's very significant. Because if you're producing the clothing in Ireland, if you're producing the goods in Ireland, that's money in the local economy. That's building Ireland. It's building the infrastructure, building the economy. And then everything that's produced out of that factory, you benefit from it. The clothes on your back, and then the money you spent to pay for those clothes goes back into the economy. It doesn't go over to China, who doesn't really need it anyway. Or India or Taiwan, or any of those places where there's cheap labour costs. Because even though it's cheap labour costs, you're not going to see a penny of it back. And it's not building industry in Ireland, it's building industry in China. Why would we favour that? Why would any nation favour that? It's the raping of your country. So Ireland is naked, though it is clothed. Why? Because it doesn't have the ability to clothe itself. As a country of men. Ireland doesn't have clothes factories enough to clothe itself. Doesn't have farms enough to feed itself. Doesn't have houses enough to house itself. It's not a country. That's not a country. So wake up, Ireland. Houses and trousers. And food in your belly. Houses and trousers and food in your belly. Or are you going to perish watching the telly? Clothes factories. What is going on? Do you know what two questions I asked people yesterday in Wexford Town. How many people here are wearing clothes made in Ireland? One lady. Yeah. I said, did you make them yourself? Yeah. How many people here have eaten something today that was produced and came from the ground in Ireland? Nobody was able to answer that. How many people ate something that came from the ground in Wexford today? I was asking these questions over and over again at the people, just to get them thinking. Nobody, not one person, apart from a lady who knitted something for herself, was able to tell me that they were buying clothes that were produced or manufactured in Ireland. This is not a racist thing. We're not against Chinese or Indians, or we love everybody. We're just saying that manufactured in our land, supporting our economy, so we don't starve over here on the island. So Irish clothes, Irish farms, Irish houses. Until you get the basics of infrastructure right, you don't have the basics of economy right. Until you have the basics of economy right, you're not a country. And you cannot avail of your rights. And that's what the designers of your demise are trying to bring about. So it's time that the Irish people said, no, hang on. We know what our needs are. We know that we have enough money and intelligence and skill to provide our needs for ourselves. Therefore, the government are standing in our way because they have their own business relationships which they shouldn't have or prioritise over the building of Irish infrastructure. So if they continue to do that and write legislation to support those international relationships and not build infrastructure at home, they are enemy of the state. They are actually a military force acting as our government, opposed to the building of our nation. Because you're naked though clothed, starving though fed, and homeless though housed. Why? Because a lot of people are just living in rooms in houses. They don't have their own home. And people who have exhibited like they're paying 3 times the amount of money on rent that they would if they were paying a mortgage, like 1,500, we'll say 2,000 euros a month on rent, where they'd only be paying 700 euros, say, for a mortgage, if they were given it by the bank, are being denied a mortgage, even though they've exhibited this for a year, 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, and beyond that even. Some people have been paying these exorbitant amounts of money for rent when they could have gotten a mortgage 5 years ago and had a lot of it paid off already. So they're not failing to build houses for the lack of money in the country, because people are paying more for rent. It's the paying of rent to landlords is impoverishing the nation. And it's not as though the landlords are really benefiting hugely, because they keep ramping up the costs the landlord has to pay, such that a lot of landlords are getting out of it, rental accommodations, or renting houses to people. So the point I'm making is, until Ireland is able to produce its own clothing, which, by the way, would be big industry to Ireland. It would be a huge increase to our economy straight away. Why? Because in order to make your own clothes, you need the fabrics to make them. Now, we're not saying that Ireland would have to produce all the fabrics, but we could produce a lot of them, and we just have to increase the amount of sheep we have. And they're a renewable resource, by the way. As long as they live, you keep getting wool from them. And then when they can't live anymore, you can eat them. And then take their hide for what, who knows, carpets, rugs. Oh, it's not vegan. Oh, so what? The animal was going to die anyway. It was old. So there are humane ways of operating these industries. And, you know, vegans just need to get off everybody's back, because we have to have clothes on our back and not vegans. So the point is this, that until you build the industry to produce your clothing, which would, by the way, increase farming because you have to produce the fabrics, you would have huge increase of employment in Ireland. Like within a year. Huge, massive. And you could incentivize young men to become sheep farmers. You could have vast amounts of sheep in the fields. Be quite beautiful, wouldn't it? Fields which look like they're full of clouds. Little fluffy clouds. And skipping, jumping, hopping little lambs. And they'll get to live out their lives. They'll only be sheared whenever that's available seasonally. And then they'll be killed when they're old. Lest you want them to rot in the fields, like. You might as well kill them while their meat is fresh and eat it. So there are ways of using these things to benefit all around. And there's no excuse but a corrupt government lining their own pockets trying to enslave you as a nation. Train the young lad to be a sheep farmer. Train him to be the runner of a factory making clothes. Train the young man to be carpenter, plumber, builder, foreman, bricklayer, block layer. Train the young man to build a house. Train the young man to farm. Train him in industry. And get those who are already good at industry around the world to show the Irish man how to do it. And then you'll know. And pay him very well for his knowledge. And that's all you need to do, become self-sufficient. Because until the country is industrially self-sufficient, it cannot be economically self-sufficient. Industrial self-sufficiency is economic self-sufficiency. Let that sink in. Blessings. Love you.